Alright, DraftScience video. I was going to do a room this morning, but I'll wait till tomorrow morning. There's just stuff to respond to. I still haven't finished listening to the Puro shit. It's just so obnoxious. I just can't, it's all about somehow my motives, and that I'm somehow ignoring something that's all quite obvious to everybody else in terms of how great and how the proof is so substantial, and it's just such a fucking lame way to argue. Especially when I draw pictures and explain exactly what I'm saying. And so speaking of these lame fuckers, Day just keeps playing these stupid fucking word games. So he caught on to the part where I was explaining to Puro that the force is 4 times. The 4 times thing is really important. This hand going from this size to 4 times smaller when I only went half the distance. That's why Einstein said you can't lens 1,000,000 miles from the sun. That would be very convenient if I could get just as much lensing by just having the light go through the bigger gravity of the giant circle of gravity coming from the sun 1,000,000 miles from the sun. No. I don't even know how this could... How can I have to argue this density argument when people talk about black holes and things having a million solar masses in the size of a grapefruit? Don't you understand that's a density argument? The sun is, you can put I don't know, see, I'm going to say a number, somebody's going to say, oh, that's the wrong number. You can put thousands of Earths inside of the sun. And yet, the gravity of the sun is only, on the surface, is only 7 times greater than the Earth. Even though I can put thousands of Earths inside of the sun. Because the Earth is denser. Density's important to gravity. How spread out your mass is. This isn't an argument that should be an argument. If I have a bunch of, if I have 10, we'll have 4 10-pound things. If I put the 10-pound things all in together or stack them, it would have more gravity than if I spread them out over a large area. Then the gravity here is going to be weak. Weaker than on this surface. Alright, so drawing pictures. The good thing about this stuff is I always do come up with new, I got another 6 things that I figured out just thinking about these subjects, little catches about why certain things happen the way they happen. So it just keeps getting better and better. So in a sense, these challenges are of some value to me, because it only makes my argument stronger and stronger and stronger. Alright, so, like I said, I shouldn't even have to argue this point. This should be unarguably true. That Einstein didn't suggest you could get gravitational lensing any distance from an object. It just didn't matter. So I shouldn't have to even argue this point. Clearly there's a reason that you have to be near the surface of something heavy. Because you need a lot of gravity. That really shouldn't be something I should have to argue. That to bend light, you need a lot of gravity. And you can't get it far away from something gravitational. You have to get it damn close to something gravitational. This is just the basics of black holes. Black holes, the inverse square rule makes black holes irrelevant really quickly. They only have this supersonic gravity close to the black hole. But you go a little ways away and it's like the black hole doesn't even exist. I shouldn't have to say this shit. I shouldn't be... There should be nobody making a counter argument. Puro's just fundamentally wrong. Okay, you have to have strong gravity to bend light. Alright, so I think the simplest way is just to do this triangle thing. Okay. So let's say this is gravity, and it comes out in a cone or something that you pass through. So if I pass through it here, okay, I'm going to get a certain amount of gravity, whatever that amount is, x. So I'll have an x amount of gravity, and I'll be bent a certain angle by that x amount of gravity. Now if I go twice the distance, so twice this distance here, I go twice that distance. Okay, so now I move this line twice the distance. Okay, I'm only this distance from here to here, this time that I'm traveling into gravity, I'm moving a constant speed, is less than twice this distance. And on top of that, not only is this line less than, okay, twice the distance, this is 1/4 the amount of gravity, because I've doubled this distance. So when I double this distance, I have 1/4 the gravity that's here. So I'm in 1/4 the gravity, and I'm not in it the same amount of, proportionally in the same amount of time. So I have two strikes against me in terms of the capacity to create this angle. So obviously this angle is going to be much, much, much smaller. It's going to be not only 1/4, something like 1/4, it's going to be also diminished by the fact that this distance isn't twice this distance. So that's what I meant by, so when I made this argument, Hothle's picking because I said, that it's 4 times the volume when you double the diameter. So what I'm basically arguing, when you double this distance, so that's a 2, you got to remember the 2, that means you're basically creating the cube, okay, which ends up with 8 things in it. But you doubled the distance, the diameter. So you have to divide the 8 by 2, and that comes up with 4. So your density of gravity is 4. That's the argument being made, okay, is that your density, your volume question, the amount of gravity per the entire volume. So it's like having the two balls spinning around each other. So you have one ball that's in a closed box, yeah. But if you put the two boxes in a space twice the diameter, you end up with 8. Well, that's a bad drawing. You end up with 8 worth that they can rotate in. So they're only in 2 of the boxes at any one time, but there's 8 boxes they could possibly be in. So you could understand that that's less density, especially versus 1 circle in 1 box. 2 circles in 8 boxes is a lot less dense. And that's basically what's happening with gravity. The further you go away, the density of the volume of the cone, or whatever you want to call it, that you're exposed to, is now diminished by that circumstance, because now the mass is in a huger volume. Alright, so, and again, this isn't even an argument I should have to make, because anybody with a little bit of logical sense should be able to figure out that if there's a bunch of spread out things in a galaxy, like this, that's low density, okay? And that if you put a circle around that to make it into like a sun, that sun's got a lot of holes in it, big giant holes in it. And so therefore it can't possibly be creating much gravity across its diameter, because its diameter is really tiny when you add up all the real mass. And that you're not going to lens any frickin' light when it goes across here. You're not going to be able to bend it with this. Like I said, this would come out to be, the gravity out here on a galaxy, with little spirals, blah, 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 blah. The gravity out here, okay? The gravity on Earth is, 10 meters per second. Every second you gain 10 more meters of deflection. you know, here in a galaxy, the numbers like 0.000000000000000001 meters per second per second. It's nothing, gravity. It's been 4 times diminished by doubling distance over and over like 1,000,000 times. There's 1,000,000 more empty circles inside of the galaxy than there are solid circles. It has no density. It has no material density. Therefore, its surface can't have much gravity. The sun has very low gravity considering its size because it's so much less dense than the Earth. But again, this is grammar school physics, and it's really obnoxious. Sorry, holiday. But it's just obnoxious to play these games. These silly I got you on something game. You got me on... I said... why didn't you point out in the video that I said 800,000 miles per hour? I mean 180,000 miles per hour. When I should have said light moves 180,000 miles a second. And then I said 1818 instead of 1918. I mean, why don't you just be a nitpicking cunt completely if you're going to be a nitpicking cunt? And just ignore the fundamental principle, which is Einstein said you can't do lensing anywhere. I mean, by Pirot's theory, there could be one black hole in the universe over there somewhere. And we could lens anywhere in the universe based on that black hole. Because its gravity goes everywhere. And it's always the same. Force equals force, you're saying. Force equals mass. So once you have a mass, it doesn't matter how far away it is. It doesn't matter how dense the circle you draw around the center of gravity. Center of gravity, kind of important here. Okay, it's the center of gravity. This is what m times n means, in a sense. I don't want to stick to that. There's no obligation to use their center of gravities in that equation. But clearly everybody understands the term center of gravity. And clearly that's how you establish density. The R number is essentially a radius of the mass swept into a sun. You're basically just saying take the two masses and sweep them with the radius between them, and that will create your gravitational body, and that'll give you your surface force, your total surface force, the total amount of gravity it's producing, its maximum gravity. So that's what the R squared means. If they're very close together, the maximum gravity goes up. If they're very far away, the maximum gravity goes down. But that's the maximum on the surface of the sphere created by the R squared. Alright, anyway. I think I've done the grammar school education here. I just shouldn't have to go any further. I mean, Einstein said it. I shouldn't have to. Einstein was wrong about almost everything. But yeah, he had some of these little basic concepts right. I mean, the ones he stole from Newton. I mean, this Vic asshole is such a stupid cunt. Where's evidence of bent space? This is the evidence of bent space, assholes. Okay? This evidence. That's bent space. All Einstein did was take this concept. My hand is now this size. It's now 4 times bigger. He took that concept and just turned it upside this way and made a funnel. See, this makes it... Can you understand, dumb cunts? This makes a funnel. You see that? That makes a funnel. That's all fucking bent space is this fact turned so you idiots could make it into some visual clown spandex bullshit that you would roll shit on that doesn't roll at the right speed, so you fully kind of completely misunderstand how gravity works because you think things get trapped in orbits without first colliding and breaking into pieces, which they have to do to lose their acceleration. It's a conservative force. I mean, I've said this. I mean, this is something like every college lecturer, professor will say, gravity's a conservative force. But apparently when I say it, you say, no, no, And that means that whatever you put into it, you're going to get back out of it. So when you're pulled by gravity by some other body, you're coming in contact with each other. Every tug or pull, I mean, if you're accelerating towards it, right, because it's got gravity, and say you're pulling towards it, it's got gravity, you're both accelerating each other. And then when you pass each other, you're going to pull exactly the opposite. But that exact opposite pulling away is already compensated for by your extra velocity you got pulling each other towards yourselves. So every bit of speed you gain going down is exactly the energy you'll need to get out. Exactly. So at the Earth's orbit around the sun, from outside the solar system, I can't throw anything into that orbit because that orbit is dependent on a speed. And I can't throw any mass in the universe into the solar system and have it fall towards the sun and not end up going faster than that speed. It'll never be able to get to where the Earth is without the gravity making it go too fucking fast. It can't happen. I didn't make the rules, jerks. Newton did, and then Einstein turned them into, fun cartoons. But those are the rules, shitheads. I mean, so you want to say I'm wrong, then go ahead and say Einstein's wrong. Go ahead and say Newton's wrong. Because I'm using their facts, asshole. Assholes. So I haven't played the second half of it. I mean, he does this whole calculation. It was just, poorly done. He had to redo it, and blah, 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 to point out, oh, it's 8 times. Because, I said double the diameter. So clearly by doubling the diameter, it means you have to create another circle to fill the volume. So if you divide 8 by 2, it's 4. But who cares? I mean, this nitpicky shit over a concept that I shouldn't have to explain. I should not have to fucking explain that the gravity on the outside of a galaxy is 0.0000000000000001 meter per second. That's a fact. Okay. Roughly. Approximately. So another anal asshole. So I might as well read the comment on this video. I mean, why do I bother? These people don't deserve anything. They just don't. I should just delete the comments, just say fuck you, die, because you people suck with this shit. Alright, so some asshole. Hey shithead, the sun has a diameter of 1.4 billion meters. Like, who cares? I mean, that changes the equation by making it, instead of 70 meters, it gets deflected 300 meters over a distance of 300 million meters. So again, we're talking about an angle that's just so tiny, it's infinitesimally small, whether you make it 200 or 500 or 700. 700 compared to 300 million. 700 compared to 300 million. They're not even close to the same kind of number. And that's your angle, asshole. Anyway, so I point out 5 times 70 equals 350. 350 meters of change over a distance of 1.4 billion meters is not that much of an angle. And that doesn't account for the fact that most of the gravity experienced will be weaker than 70 meters per second, fuckhead. Because this is another point that nobody seems to fucking be able to understand. But the gravity on the surface means it's only on the surface. So you have to be on the surface to feel that gravity. And as soon as you're moving past a spherical object, obviously your distance from the surface gets further and further away as you travel. And this is weaker and weaker gravity by the inverse square rule, which means that you're almost twice the distance right there. You're already twice the distance. So you're already 4 times less gravity. You got the size of the sun wrong because you didn't bother to check, since you didn't believe in evidence. Because you don't believe in evidence. Evidence of what? The argument is that the Einstein lensing experience has never been repeated. Is this a counter-argument to that? What evidence? I'm pointing out the absence of the evidence. The experiment's never been successfully repeated. And then I point out that the Hubble telescope can do it every motherfucking cunt day. That's a fact. How am I the one not believing in the evidence? The evidence what? That they didn't produce? Huh? What? Fuck. So don't pay any attention to the subject of the video, which is the lack of evidence for gravitational lensing. What is the evidence that you're saying I don't believe in? Where's the piece of fucking evidence that has any goddamn motherfucking cunt integrity? Show me the gravitational lensing evidence that has huge integrity. It's just undisputably, factually brilliant. Show it to me, shithead. Just the shit you pulled out of your ass. So what? I pulled out of my ass the inverse square rule. Oh, Newton's rule. You don't understand angular momentum, so you can't figure out why the bodies don't just crash into each other and end up in a diminishing spiral. Why the bodies don't just crash into each other and end up in a diminishing... So they crash into each other and end up in a diminishing spiral. So that's what you're saying the 2 black holes and the gravitational wave thing did? The 2 black holes crashed into each other, then spiraled, and then burped. 4 solar masses of energy in the form of bent space. Sure they did. I mean, again, let me make this argument. If 2 black holes exist at a distance, first off, so this is one of the things on my list, because this is a really interesting conceptual fact. Speed and size I have written down there. See, it's hard to give big things speed, because that means they have to collect a whole bunch of motion in one direction. That's hard to do. So if you think about the solar system, the things moving in absolute terms, the fastest have to be the small things, like the moon. Because the moon is obviously going as fast as the sun, as fast as the earth, and now the extra speed of the moon itself in its orbit. So the moon is moving relatively, compared to everybody else's speed, absolutely faster. There's no way to make it not go faster because of its depth in the chain. The galaxy, the sun, the planets, the moon. Now, if there was only 2 levels of depth, then you could say either one could be the stationary object. But as soon as you have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 levels of depth, then you're certain that the moon can't be the frozen body, because then there's no energy equation that could account for the motion of the entire universe at the preposterous speed it would have to be spinning at to keep the moon stationary. Clearly, moving the moon 50 miles an hour sounds a little bit easier than moving the entire universe 50 miles an hour. But you have to believe in conservation, and you have to believe that there's an actual force that creates movement to accept that that's the limitation here. That's the reasoning you can apply to break Einstein's silly relativity notion that you can't tell who's what. Because you can tell logically. Reasonable deduction. will answer the question. But anyway, so there's no accounting for this scenario where two black holes first have to have speed. They have to be moving. So big thing with a lot of velocity doesn't happen. Hard for it to collect a lot of velocity. Little things can be supernovaed out of suns, but black holes, that's a lot of mass to have converted into one kind of fish, kind of a thing. So anyway, so they have to come into contact with each other in some manner. So as they come into contact, so this one's moving this way and this one's moving that way, you know, obviously they'd be going at some angle, like you could say even this way, and this one's coming in this way, and so they just curve into each other. They have plenty of time to just curve into each other's gravity and just head-on collide. That's what the velocity is going to do. This is the likely trajectory. Crash right into each other. Okay, and the second most likely trajectory is there's not enough gravity, not enough time. All they do is bend around each other a little bit, and this one shoots out this way, and this one shoots out that way. That's the second most likely trajectory. But the idea that they get into some kind of spirally thing, okay, where this one comes in, this one comes in, they spiral together, not likely at all. Not physically possible by physics. Physics says you just can't do that circle-y thing, because by the time you start going this way around something, you already have too much velocity to do anything else but shoot right the fuck back out of the well. It's just too much velocity. Actually, you have too much speed right here, and you're just going to fly back out of the well. So there's just no mechanics that make it possible, unless the objects aren't dense. You know, they don't produce any gravity, and if they don't produce any gravity, then there's no change in direction. And if they produce a lot of gravity and a lot of change in direction, then they produce a bunch of acceleration. So you can't deal with those two things. You either have acceleration and change, or you have no change and no acceleration. But you can't do lots of change and no acceleration. Come on, cat. What do you want? Come on. Make up your mind. You're not making up your mind. You're just standing there looking at me. Didn't plan on this interruption. Well, I never plan on the cat's interruptions. It's just his way. Yes, I understand. You're a cat. It's what you do best. Irritate me. Alright, anyway, where was I? Oh, okay, so I'll finish reading this stupid comment. Alright. So again, this is on a video, you know, explaining the, what the hell subject was it? Well, it doesn't matter. You're not on the subject. Yeah, that's it. You don't understand that density has nothing to do with gravitational constant equation. Well, again, the gravitational constant is a tiny piece of nothing that doesn't really have anything to do with any of this. So you want to say it's relevant, go ahead and pretend it's relevant, but it's really not relevant to any of this. So in your argument with Piro, you tried to tell him that gravity acts equally along R. Gravity equals acts equally along R. Where did I do that? What does that even mean? Equally along R. It's R squared, and I'm the one saying the gravity is 4 times weaker. So how am I saying it's equal? You thought that Doppler effect, so now you're on a different subject, was a function of density. Are you insane? Because of helium analogy. Because of a helium analogy. What are you talking about? You crazy fuck. Yeah, I don't know what he's talking about there. Does anybody know what he's talking about there? I've pointed out that I wouldn't even use the word Doppler effect, but the point is that the fact that there's redshift or blue shift is a function of not only the metabolism of the matter producing the light, but it's also a function of how absolutely fast the thing that's producing the light is moving in space, because it can't possibly dump photons at the set frequency if it's moving half the speed of light. Anyway, so you don't understand that it actually is simply a function of motion of the mechanism creating the sound. I've really never bothered with sound and the Doppler effect, and frankly, so I don't even understand how this the helium analogy must be when somebody uses helium to change the pitch of their voice, that they're changing the density of the medium that their voice has to be transmitted in, which changes the speed of the formation of the waves, and that's why it sounds higher, is because the waves end up closer together because of the less dense air where the vibrations are taking place. They can vibrate more quickly because there's a less dense medium. And just to remind you, the modern mystic said he knew a lot about economics because he had listened to 10,000 hours of podcasts. You ripped it for it. Well, you think economics is the same as physics, so you think economics is some sort of real science with real foundational principles. There's a ton of economics people who still think you need deposits to lend money. I mean, economists are retarded. Anyway, now I mean, really, do you think there's a real science to economics that is of any credibility at all? There's some sort of foundational facts of economics, like what, the invisible hand? Do you think that's a foundational fact, that there's this invisible hand that fixes everything and does so efficiently? So even though the capitalists running the solar industry are producing solar energy at 1/7 of its capacity, that they have created a system that only gains 30% of the potential of the solar panels, somehow the invisible hand is going to fix that. And that's economics. That's the science of economics, is the fact that they think it's working. And I'm crazy or non-scientific as an economics person by saying 30% efficiency is a shitty invisible hand. So anyway, can't get shittier. Well, you could be 20% or 10%, but I'm just saying you're just as bad as you can get. Hypocrite much? Well, again, head of Dunning-Kruger. I mean, you're cliche enough. How many cliches are you going to use? How much pigeonholey, bullshitty, unfounded, nonsensical drivel-dravel are you going to type? You don't know enough about actual real physics to accurately know how incompetent you actually are. Well, again, if that were true, then one of you fuckers could, elucidate and point out how I'm wrong about something. But, this video was pointing out how there's been an experiment that's probably one of the foundational conclusions in science, that light can be bent by gravity. It's a foundational conclusion, is based on evidence that has not been repeated, or that is completely mockable in terms of its ludicrousness. The galaxy's lensing images. They can't be made to make rational sense or be consistent with physics principles unless they invent God matter to make the math work. Just like Huygens is the only way they can make the single slit explainable. They have to cheat. They create a fake principle they only use in one circumstance because their math doesn't work. The greatest math ever invented, the greatest formula ever, the most reliable, the most proven fact in the universe, quantum theory. And what do they have to do? They have to keep creating fake things to fix it. Um, knowing a bunch of facts doesn't make you intelligent. Well, I'm sorry, but that's exactly what makes you intelligent. Facts create logic. There's no such thing as logic. Facts force conclusions. Facts, when you put them next to each other, like gravity, they bend into each other and they point at a vector, which is, conclusion, truth, related fact. That's what logic is. So if you understand the physics of logic, you understand that facts make facts. Fantasies make fantasies. That's what Pyrrho lives in. Fantasies. Alright. Actually, knowing a bunch of facts doesn't make you intelligent. Understanding what they mean does. Again, the facts speak for themselves. The fact that the experiment that made Einstein famous was conducted by his friend and that it hasn't been repeated is a fact that indicates that's not really a great foundation for a conclusion. Fuckhead. So anyway, fuck you until dead. You don't understand. You don't understand that density has nothing to do with gravitational constant equation. The gravitational constants equals sync? Question mark. The gravitational constant equation. Well, yeah, there's no equation. There's just a number that's infinitesimally small. In any case, it seems that Emendam's obvious claims is that unless the body doing the lensing is very, very dense, there will not be enough mass there to produce very much of a diffraction, and thus the diffraction will be very hard to detect. The point is, though, the real point is that there's no consistent relationship. So as I go twice as I can't travel through more of the gravity further away, because the further away I am, it's 4 times less gravity. So I can't do this extra distance, in less gravity. It just doesn't. I'm always going to be losing by a half. So the further away I get from the surface, the less bending will take place, even if I wait and let the thing move through it, because I can't change the speed of a photon. Now, if it was a planet, I can change the speed of the planet. I can make the planet go very slow in the weak gravity, and then it could bend more. But I can't change the speed of a photon. Ultimately, this is a numbers game. Shut up and calculate seems to me the appropriate attitude. Once the numbers are there, then one can see whether it is feasible to create devices to measure the very small numbers that pop out. The point is Einstein already did that, and why can't we just accept the fact that Einstein basically said that it would be silly to look 10,000 miles away from the sun for gravitational lensing, because you're not going to find any there, because the gravity's too weak. Even though the photon's in it longer, it's so fucking weak, because it's 10,000, it's a long way. Well, 10,000 miles is not a very long way compared to the size of the sun. So I'm just saying that, you have to go a billion, just where the Earth is. The gravity the Earth is in from the sun is like 0.001 meters per second. It's lame gravity by comparison to the surface. And the point is the ratio between the extra distance of doubling the diameter, the ratio is 4:1. So that the point is double the distance, but you're in twice as weak gravity. No, 4 times weaker, which means twice as weak. So even though you're traveling twice as much distance in the gravity you're traveling through is 4 times weaker. So you've lost by a half. You felt half. If it was a porcupine, okay, and I get twice as far away, I'm lessening the capacity of the quills to hit me by 2. So every time I double the distance, I'm getting half as likely to get hit by a quill. Something like that. So there's no way to fix that. You can't do this moronic Pyrrho thing where it doesn't matter how far away from gravity you are, or matter, or mass. And clearly, again, I don't even know why. I mean, this reaction to the word density in a world where people are talking about, look, I don't believe the whole theory of black holes. I don't believe there's some way you can compress physical matter 1,000,000 times. I mean, maybe you could find some way to compress matter twice. You can make the Earth half as big. Make the atoms half as big. Maybe. But 1,000,000 times smaller? This is the kind of bullshit that black holes require. Is huge magnitudes of compression of atoms. We've never compressed an atom. There's no theoretical reason to believe it can possibly be done. And yet they claim it exists. So I'm just saying, but even if you believe this, you should understand. I mean, there really can't be an argument. You do understand the reason why black holes are special is because they're so dense. All right. So, yeah, I'm really not. I got so much to dig out of here in terms of all this crappy rhetoric and how much of it to bother getting into the minutia of it. I mean, I don't know if there's a point of playing the Pyrrho thing, but it's just the same fucking insulting accusations over and over again, as if I'm the one saying, I don't feel right about it. That doesn't feel good. It doesn't... Blah, 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 blah. This is so insulting. I mean, the history of this whole fucking thing is right in the open. I mean, I made it clear that, yes, well, Copenhagen and the idea of photons going through 2 slits, and then the lie, and I found out quite early on, the Dr. Quantum lie, that, that they did this experiment where they didn't record the results and the photons behaved differently than when they wrote them down. Like the photons are reading our mind, was just so outrageously silly that, yeah, I was provoked to say there's got to be a better explanation than this woo. This fucking religious crap of mind-reading photons. And because I found it contemptible that a science that's supposed to have some kind of integrity was wearing that pink dress with that yellow fucking underwear, with the glitter fingernail polish. I mean, it was such sissy fucking science. It was so goddamn made up Jesus bullshit. The fact that I found that disgusting, somehow Pyrrho calls that my bigotry. Now that's a rational objection to absolute nonsense being injected into science. This is creation physics. This isn't physics. This Copenhagen crap, these mind-reading photons, this is creation physics. It's not physics. This isn't science. This is nonsense, gobbledygook bullshit made up by a bunch of fruitcakes. Dark matter. It fixes things. So anyway, yeah, so Numbly Num was pointing out to this whole personal bias. Somehow I have a personal bias. I have a bias against lies, deceptions, inaccuracies. And when Feynman says, look, a single slit, it's just a lump, when Feynman had to know single slits produce diffraction patterns that look like interference patterns. It doesn't lump. Shit. Come on. Well, whatever. So, I guess the real point is like for the Vicks of the world, it's some sort of Pope argument. So whatever the bishops vote for, that's the God of truth. And no one can challenge it, and certainly no one can do it with an argument, like why they're wrong on the facts. That's just silly. And if they do present the argument, they don't have any obligation to deal with the evidence presented as an argument against the fallacy that they have accepted as a majority. So the majority is just always right. So, and there's no rational way to judge. We're not capable of reasoning and figuring out when majorities are idiots and when majorities aren't idiots, because there's no truth here and there's no facts that can be gleaned. So if I make the argument that it seems like weak evidence when you haven't repeated an experiment, when the experiment was done with by your best friend, it was never repeated, and then the rest of your evidence is based on inventing something called dark matter to make the math work, and yet you don't do the calculations completely, and no one should no one should say, hey, that needs to be fixed. That's not good enough. That's an outrageous thing for me to say it's not good enough. How dare I offend the majority? I mean, so I don't know if I want to get to all this stuff or not. Well, I'll just bring up some of it. So I did point out how it was interesting that I remembered Newton talking about the surface of the aperture, in the small slit situation, creating polarized light. And I think that is a feature, and that's a recognition that to get polarized, it's likely the photons had to interact with an electron, and in doing so got destroyed. That's another thing Vic brought up, like the double eraser kind of crap and the whole supersymmetry arguments, and the crap that, oh, it must be that there's something moving faster than the speed of light, but it's not really moving faster, but it's not really well, it's communication, but it somehow isn't communication. Like, that makes any sense? No. No, as soon as you think something's going faster than the speed of light, it's time to think there must be some other explanation. And maybe the explanation is how do you know when a photon is released by an electron? I mean, does the electron burp and go, oh, I made a burp sound. Did you hear the burp I made when I let that photon go? So you can start your clock when I burp because I burp when I let photons go? I mean, there's really no way to tell when you create a photon. And there's no real way to see one when it moves past you. And there's really no way to detect one any other way but to absorb it and have an electron move. No other way. And all those things take time. And then he has experiments with a bunch of mirrors in them. Will you really think light reflects off mirrors? So do you think the light just bounces off? It just hits it and bounces off. There isn't some sort of absorption and readmission. And we might imagine that takes time. And then it's not a physical fact that light takes time to travel through glass. What do you think it's doing while it's taking time traveling through the glass? And none of that would have anything to do with your timed experiments where you know exactly where photons are going. And that you've declared them Jane and Jim or whatever, and now you know exactly where each one is all the time. I don't think so. Well, anyway, I don't even get into that shit. But I mean, if you are at all dismissive of how that is just such brilliant science and just so undisputable, right? The whole issue is really about, they say, like Newtonian physics says the answer should be this, and quantum mechanics says the answer should be this, and they get this answer. I mean, that's the variance we're talking about, right? I'm just saying it's not much of a variance in the first place, and certainly that much difference, points versus roundy edges, maybe can be accounted for with something that doesn't occur to them. Yeah, maybe. All right. Anyway. Okay, so I was thinking about charge moving through wires, and acceleration is important. So when you induce a charge moving in a wire, you can only induce it in electrons you accelerate. So they can't be moving already. So if they're already moving at any kind of real speed, we're back to that tangential dimension problem. You can't really create you can't get to them, to push them, because they don't have sufficient material substance. So the real game is moving electrons that aren't already moving, because you really can't see the ones that are moving from the perpendicular angle. So that was one point I wanted to make. I mean, it's important in terms of understanding why voltages move through wires, and why when you're inducing a voltage is different than when the voltage is already existing in the wire. So why magnetism has very little effect on a voltage moving through a wire. So if the voltage is already moving through the wire, you're not going to affect it much by screwing around with magnets. You can only affect induced voltages, so voltages where you're creating the acceleration of an electron. So electrons already moving, you can't really stop them. The ones you can get to are the ones that have an acquired motion, the ones that aren't moving much, because they are the ones that still have the perpendicular. They still have their thickness. The ones that are moving have gotten very thin, and there's no way you can't throw something at them because they've gotten thin. It's almost like the gravity argument, where, the farther away I go from the gravity, I get tiny. I get really, really small. So if this is shooting stuff, the target gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Same kind of argument. As an electron moves faster and faster, it gets harder and harder to hit it with anything. So I think that's a good point. So, precision only movement not useful to acceleration. So the perpendicular thing too. Another point somebody made was, things moving in some kind of other, not sideways or not forward. And yeah, I metaphor things into the 3 dimensions. I just generalized that everything going like this would be counted as this, and everything going like this would be counted as this, and because this would be the opposite of that, and that kind of thing. But you really don't even have to do that, but you can sort of logically understand too that anything that has any positive element, so say this is what we call a dimension, the half of a dimension, this arc. So anything in this arc has a forward element, and that's really how everything exists, is an element, because it only really exists turning on and off, and it only really exists as a certain amount of time in a direction. So technically, this angle has a certain amount of time going this way and a certain amount of time going that way. It's the way it can be perceived. But anyway, so this wouldn't really be gotten rid of if something's gaining acceleration. It wouldn't get rid of this because this has a positive component. So it has to get rid of stuff that doesn't have a positive component. And so the perpendicular obviously doesn't have a positive component. And the negative component, it has to keep, because that's part of the balance part, right? So it's getting a bunch of, as it's going faster, it's coming into a lot more stuff. So it's got to keep the proportions even. So it can't expel this stuff, because that wouldn't match the new stuff coming in. It has to, let me see how to say that. It has to maintain a balance of the amount of stuff of equal opposites. So it really can't get rid of the opposite, because it's got to maintain a lot of arrows going this way. So it has a ton of arrows going this way. It has arrows going this way, and it has arrows going this way. All of those going this way, it's keeping if it's accelerating this way. So if it's going to move faster this way, it has to keep the ones it's got. The only way it can keep the ones it's got to keep the opposite ones. So when the electron is going to convert something, it can't convert this, because if it converts one going this way, it's going to lose an arrow going the other way, forward. And it needs those arrows to go faster forward. So really the only one it can afford to get rid of is this, or this, or this, or this. You know what I'm saying? I mean, not this, because I was using this as forward. So this, 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 this. It can only get rid of the perpendiculars. So that's why the force is always perpendicular, is because perpendicular has no value to motion this way. Okay. And so you just convert a fish going that way for a fish going that way. Alright. So electrons changing photons and killing the frequency. So in a related argument, once you understand this fish replacement thing, so when a photon is going into an electron, this is another kind of interesting thing. What's happening is the frequency can be destroyed because the kinetic idea of it never bangs into something that isn't the same as it. How to do this? I mean, I drew it. The picture is like you kind of understand, like there's an XY reaction, and the XY reaction should produce an arrow going this way and an arrow going this way, to complete the thing. But the point is, inside the electron, it can wait, in a sense, because this arrow can end up being this arrow for a period, and then it can be this arrow, and then it can go what it should be as the reaction arrow of this. So the timing of it can be changed. So in a sense, what you're doing is mixing pairs of reactions. So two reactions are happening, and what it basically does is, say there's a purely kinetic crashing into each other reaction that should create the opposite directions. That reaction would be happening at the same time as this reaction in a sense, and these two reactions would just exchange their components, so you end up with the YW and the XZ. So this causes this, and this causes that. But anyway, that's a metaphor, or a way of modeling. It's not an explicit statement describing its actual circumstances, just giving an indication that what's really being replaced is a proportion of time spent in a certain direction. And so now it can change a path by breaking. What it's really breaking is the polarization. So, alright, so to understand this, so what makes a photon recognizable to an electron is not the fact that it has a constant frequency, consistent frequency, distance between the tons, and they all have the same polarization. Now a stream of light can have, this frequency has to be the same, but the polarization of this stream can be different than the polarization of this stream. So the stream of light, a beam of light, can have mixed polarizations in it, but each individual stream of photons has to have the same polarization to be consumed by an electron. And what's happening in the electron is it's changing the polarization. So when it absorbs, so when it has the XY, the X reaction taking place inside of it, this goes in, and this goes in, and this goes out. So, this idea that a kinetic reaction could look like this hit this and went this way, or this went right through this and went that way, and this went this way, but the end result is whatever happened, whether you had a 90-degree change or whether it just went through each other, it would look exactly the same. Well, what's happening inside the electron is this has, say, polarization A, and it leaves polarization B. And that's the change. And now, when the